Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
What is Awesome Health? It's actually an acronym that stands for air, water, exercise, sunshine, optimizers, mental beliefs and attitudes, and education. These are the pillars of peak health, and my team and I have created a free 12-week course that you can use to transform. Each day, you'll get a written and video lesson delivered to your inbox. Everything is covered from the foundations of digestion to advanced alternative therapies few people know about. And again, it's 100% free. Just go to bioptimizers.com. That's bioptimizers.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to talk about some alternative solutions to medication and how to release the media's control of your mindset. And we have none other than Dr. Jason Dean, who is not only a husband, a dad, but a physician, patriot, and humanitarian. As the founder of the Revolution Network and Brave TV, he is dedicated to getting the American world public out of health and financial slavery. He started his career working in the sports industry with NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NHL, and left to fulfill a bigger purpose as a physician. He lives for the truth and works to help to see others see it. And of course, this is really relevant with the time. So I want to thank you, Dr. Jason, for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it so much. Anytime we can have good minds come together for the good of the world and educate, it's always a good opportunity.
Well, there's a couple areas that are happening right now in the world. We've just gone through the biggest health experiment worldwide that's happening. And the data that's coming in is not very supportive that the interactions that was purported by our governments and our regulatory bodies are very good. But without getting too controversial, because that'll get you nailed off the airwaves, there's a couple areas that I think that you are steered towards, and that is natural health. And I'd like you to know your definition of it. The parasitical issue, I think, is really important because I read a book years ago, Parasite Rex, which was the most terrifying book on health ever. And I read it because I literally got a parasite while in Indonesia and was eating away at my eye. I almost lost my eye from it.
Wow.
And then the other third thing I want to touch to, and we will get that near the end, is what people can do in regards to what's happened with the spike protein and all the nuances about that from a natural health standpoint, what are going to best protect our health in the long term. So can you share your background and what maybe natural health means to you as a physician?
Yeah, I'll give a brief synopsis of my story too, because that'll kind of give you a background of what happened and how I got to where I was. And because I mean, natural health is the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of a person in general. And when I say natural, it means going back to as much of the God-given earth as we can to actually help our bodies. Because if you look at, I have a lot of historical books or going back to ancient nutrition or ancient healing, and when you look at those, people healed very differently then than they do now. I mean, it's completely different. When I say, because no one heals necessarily from a medication, but the how I got into that is. In the bio, I did come from a sports background. So right out of school, I was part of the mainstream, mindset. Now, I grew up with a little bit of chiropractic care. My mom took me to a chiropractor, things like that. But I actually come from one side of my family, drug and alcohol. They're already mostly recovered. My mom is fully recovered, which is great, and sober. So that's happy. But we grew up with, the doctor was the authority. They were the leader. They were the educator. They knew everything was right. And I was never on a bunch of medications growing up, but, we had a lot of people around that had heart disease and things like that. My grandmother passed away from, I think, her third or fourth heart attack. My grandfather, pancreatic cancer. So I grew up in that world. I went into my education and I started traveling the world, which was a blast. I was in sports software and marketing. And so I got to travel around the country, different cities. It's cool when you get to go out and you get to go to a steakhouse and you have a credit card you can just spend on. And, you think, yeah, this is the best in the world. And you don't realize you're necessarily putting food, alcohol in your body that's not exactly helping you. And so by my mid-20s, I was having really bad anxiety. I would say mild depression. I don't want to, there's a lot of people out there that battle a lot of stuff. I wouldn't say hardcore depression, but mild depression. And so I started having heart attack symptoms in my chest, down my arm, left side, et cetera, which is pretty scary. But in your 26, 27 years old, you don't admit that to anybody. So I was kind of just like dealing with it. But finally, I had good insurance, in air quotes. So I set up a doctor's appointment with a primary care. I knew nothing about healthcare at that time. So primary care, I go in, they run the blood. They say something about, a little bit of iron off. And then she asked the $1 million question. Do you ever get anxiety? And I go, yeah. So she referred me to a psychiatrist. I knew nothing about it. So I went, had a couple visits, nothing great. They sat me down in front of a multiple choice test. I took the test, and it was the test. The questions were like, do you get distracted? I was like, of course I get distracted. Like, somebody walks in a room, you're going to look up and check to see who's coming in. They ranked me in the 98th percentile of ADD, ADHD. They put me on Adderall and Zoloft.
Wow.
And so I went home. I was a bachelor at the time, living in Boston, Massachusetts. I went home. I took those on a Friday night. I was up. Now, I can preface this for the audience with, I've personally never done a street drug in my life. I've only drank to excess maybe a handful of times in my life because I come from a drug alcohol background. So I stayed away from it as much as I could. So I didn't know what high was. I took those 2 medications on a Friday night. I was up until 4 a.m. on Saturday morning, cleaning my apartment. Now, I jokingly say, my wife will tell you I'm not the cleanest person in the world. So the idea that I would be cleaning my apartment till 4 a.m. the next morning on a Saturday, not too likely, because they took me out of my mind, but it wasn't a good thing. So I took myself off of it with one day. So if you're on a psychotropic drug, you can't do that because they're actually legalized form of street drugs. You have to be very cautious what you're doing because of how potent they are. But that was kind of one of my moments where I was like, wait, this doesn't seem right. I mean, it made me feel better, but also there was this whole other aspect to it that didn't make me feel better, right? It was like, wait, that's really kind of messed up. And so by divine path, the way I look at it is I meet my wife, who's already a chiropractor. So I meet her, I find out that sugar was literally killing me. And between chiropractic adjustments, muscle testing, kinesiology, supplementation, changing my diet over the next year to 2 years, everything disappeared. It was gone. And so that was my change from like, oh, medicine over here to wait a second. My whole body just shifted. My whole mind just shifted. My whole brain just shifted by getting the spine aligned, getting proper nutrition in my body, and cutting out not just the toxins, the poisons, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's how I popped into natural healthcare. And I went from, I wasn't hardcore medical, but I went from, mainstream medical to now I'm pretty radical on the natural health side. I mean, I'm not an anti-medication person. I believe there's a time and place for medications, but what we have in America now is not healthcare. What we have in America is basically cartels selling drugs as much as they can, as fast as they can to make lots of profits. The top 3 diseases are skyrocketing in the world. And so I look at it and go, okay, we can save some lives with some great medications and some great inventions. But what we've turned it into now is just an abomination, because you look back again, my library at home, tons of ancient healing and history books showing how people used herbs, plants, medicines, real stuff from nature to start healing their body. I mean, cancer therapy, et cetera, just tons of stuff. So that's kind of how, in a nutshell, I would say I would look at natural health as.
I want to dive into the next thing in this whole topic of parasites, which is not well understood or well known or well tested for. However, if you look historically, parasites are one of the number 1 killers of humanity throughout time. And I think a lot of people are dealing with parasites, but have no idea of what's happening in their lives and how detrimental that they can be to their happiness, their health and their vitality. Can you talk a little bit about parasites, what they are, how they impact us, and maybe how you can find out if you have them or they're impacting your life?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's so funny because so I'm in Florida now. I live with my wife in Florida and Central Florida area. And we have a brick and mortar practice, but we also see people from a distance all around the world. And we've been doing muscle testing, applied kinesiology for a long period of time, along with chiropractic. And so we're one of the biggest offices just from a standpoint of volume of people coming in. And with anything, you evolve. And I don't know if a lot of people understand this, but the more knowledge you take in, the more training you get, the more you evolve as a entity, a being, a human, et cetera. And so the more classes my wife and I take, I mean, I'm on the road right now, so we're taking a class. My wife is teaching this one, and you'd be like, oh, if you're teaching, you're not learning. No, we learn all the time. I learn even when I'm teaching, like picking up from other people. So as we were evolving, we were already handling chronic health issues in people. But as we were evolving, we were getting harder and harder cases coming in, to the point where some of our old stuff wasn't being as effective as we wanted it to. And one of the biggest things that was coming up was parasitic issues, molds, and things like Lyme, Babesia, et cetera. Now, being in Florida, mold is a big thing anyway, because it's so moist in hurricanes and storms. But the parasite thing wouldn't go away. We had to amp up more and more from a supplementation standpoint, because these things are really smart. Parasites are actually genius. They evolve in your body. They adapt to, like, they actually know that you're trying to kill them. And so they back off the attack, thinking that we think they're gone, and then they come back in again. I mean, they're there, but they come back out, of the woodwork or the hidden areas, and they attack again. And so the interesting part of being in Florida is we had a lot of people coming from the islands, from like Jamaica, Bahamas, Panama, et cetera, Caribbean. And this is the fascinating part about this, because you said, it's such a problem. I don't want to say all diseases lead to it, but obviously parasites are at the root cause of so many issues. And we used to get our island population coming in, and we'd start asking them questions about it, because you hear about subtropical diseases in the college books. I actually have a textbook at home that thick that's just on parasitology and parasitic issues, that some of the biggest manufacturing scientists wrote. And I'm like, wait a second, like you wrote it, but then you say that America doesn't have parasites, or it's not a big deal in America, yet people are traveling back and forth to third world countries, but we don't have it here. Like, it made no sense. And so I talked to our island population, and they would say, what do you know about parasites? And they're like, oh, I don't know if you know this, but I mean, let's just use Jamaica, for example. Many of their population, they make their own herbal tinctures because they have ancient roots in medicine. They would make themselves, say 2, 3, 4 times a year. They would take their own protocols from an herbal standpoint, because they knew that they had to combat the parasitic activity. Yet in America, not only do we not do that, we have it in some of the medications, we have it in the food system, it's in the air, it's in the water, but America's like, no, we don't have parasites. So that's how we got started in it.
So can you explain to people what a parasite actually is?
Yeah, good question. So a parasite needs a host. So now keep in mind, with parasites, 70% roughly, 70% you don't see to the eye, like they're not visible, they're microscopic, right? So a lot of people we'll do parasite cleanses with people, and like big stuff will come out. They're like, oh my gosh, what is that?
Right.
Well, like, there's your roundworms and things like that, your nematodes, your tapeworms, which a lot of people have, strongyloides. So you'll have some that are actually visible, but then a lot are very small. I mean, you have Babesia, which is literally just, which is kind of a byproduct of Lyme. Babesia, which is in the bloodstream. So you're not going to see it unless you have a microscopic live blood analysis. And so they require a host, meaning they require you. Now, I'll also say this about parasites is typically they go after somebody who's weak. They go after a weak area. So what we find a lot is somebody who's maybe had an injury, or they're chronically ill, maybe a diabetic situation or things like that. Parasites go towards the weak spot. And not to sound really morbid or not, but in scripture, it's said that, like, from dust we come, to dust will return, right? Because obviously we come from the ground, whether you are a faith person or not, we come from the ground, our body does. Well, not to sound gross, but if you put a body, it's like someone dies, you put a body not in the grave, you just put them on the ground out in the forest, what's going to happen over a period of time? That body is going to decay. Well, how does it decay? Well, the microorganisms, the parasites come up and they start obviously deteriorating the body, and the body goes back to the ground. So this stuff is all around us. The problem is it's supposed to be in somewhat of a symbiotic relationship, but the problem is our soil has been destroyed, as you probably know. Our soil is terrible today, right? The body is sick because of the food we're putting into our systems, the water we're drinking, the air we're breathing, et cetera. Unfortunately, there's not nice people that run the world right now, which we have to change. But over a period of time, these parasites, which were supposed to be staying at bay, have actually come out of the woodwork, and they start overtaking everything. And so a lot of chronic health issues. Lyme is all over the place. And I tell people, this is why my one stable, important data point with Lyme. There's so many people out there that take antibiotics. You will never kill the Lyme until you kill the parasites, because the Lyme will actually consume nutrients, and then they will actually poop it out in the system, and you'll have this cycle going over and over and over again, where you're trying to kill all this bacteria, the Lyme bacteria, but the parasite is regurgitating the whole thing. And so it's such a big issue. I mean, Lyme is everywhere. And again, we handle a lot, but I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. How do you test? How do you like to test for parasites? Are there particular tests that you do? Is it through kinesiological testing? What's the best way to go?
Yeah. So priority in our world, we do kinesiology first. We do frequency technology. So we have vials that actually have their water, but they have frequency in them. So we find the frequencies. We don't use it in practice, but I actually have a frequency machine at home that will actually dial up any frequency of any parasite, and you can actually go to work on it. But in the office, we would use muscle testing. Secondary is you could actually do some blood analysis. Now, we use a company called Vibrant America. They have some stuff. And then third, of course, you have live blood cell analysis, right? So live blood cell analysis, which is not always easy to find because it's been under a lot of scrutiny. Anything under scrutiny usually means it works well. Yeah. And with live blood cell analysis, you can actually look at literally. And let me pick that apart real quick for the audience. If you go to say like a LabQuest or LabCorp, Quest, whatever those ones are, when you get blood drawn, it goes into a vial. That is dead blood. That blood is looked under a microscope. It's a picture in time. At that moment, whatever is in there is what they see. Now, keep in mind, your blood could change in a week. Your blood could change in a couple of days. So they don't tell you that. Live blood cell analysis is literally where they draw the blood and they look at it right there at that moment under a microscope. And they can, I mean, you can bring it up on a screen. You can literally see parasites wiggling around, bacteria in there, biocomponents wiggling. Like that is right now, that is happening. And so I love that. I actually wish that would become much more mainstream because that's such an amazing diagnostic tool. But those are probably the three that we start with. I start non-invasive as possible. So that's why we start with muscle testing, because I can pick up a lot there. And then I go to blood testing if I need to, if the person, they're getting better, but we're like not getting over a barrier, I'll bring that in afterwards.
That's great. I think really good stuff. And this is one of the beauties, I think, of people who are experts in kinesiological testing and applying their expertise to it, is that you can, through muscle testing, we talk about this a lot at Bioptimizers, is you can determine maybe the areas of focus, and if someone's coming at you, there could be hundreds of potential challenges that you don't know, and you've got to sort through them quickly. And kinesiological testing is a way to isolate maybe what are the big movers, and then start directing the care towards the patient in a more effective way, without kind of just randomly going through presuppositions about what.
Oh yeah. And I mean, a person heals in like what we call layers, right? So I tell a person that comes in, it's so funny. I have, the average public person who might find me, whether it's online or actually physically in the office, they come in. We have such our mentality, as whether you want to call it Americans or anywhere else across the world, it's a planetary problem at this point. We look for such fast results, and we want fast, like fast, right? So somebody will come in. So I've been working on my health I've been in this natural health space for 20 years. So I've been working. So people are like, oh, aren't you just perfectly healthy? I'm like, I work on this every single day. I still have to kill off some stuff that I've been coming in contact with. The body works in layers, right? So now hopefully you can get through the layers sooner, but you still work. You have to dig down to that cellular level, and there might be 10, 20 different toxins in there. You might find something later on that came up that you didn't know was there. Plus, there's also the whole energetic realm that sometimes is connected to a person that you have to deal with. When I say natural health, it's not just your physical, like who are people connected to? Do you have people around you that are not good people, family, mindset stuff, et cetera. So we dive deep, but it's layers. It really does come down to layers. So you're not going to fix something overnight. I wish you could, but it takes time to build that stuff up. So I always like to tell people, it's going to take some time. You have to build on this. And I think based on, I know what you guys do, you understand that whole mentality as well.
Absolutely. Health is it's not just what's going on inside the system, it's also the environment. And I have a saying that I picked up from one of my teachers, which is environment is stronger than will. So inserting yourself in the right environment, the ability for lifestyle innovation and the consistent change is a product of environment. If you look at the most successful sports teams, you look at the most successful education centers or the most successful families, it is about the environment that they create and how they create an environment that supports whatever the outcome-oriented goal. And if you don't have that oriented in your life properly, it becomes very challenging. And today, there's all these inputs that are bombarding us to chip away at creating that environment. So you need to be conscientious in its application and vigilant in order to maintain it. I want to switch gears to another thing beyond parasites. And this is a dicey topic in today's world, but I want to touch on it briefly because it's now just so pervasive in our world. Of course, we went through COVID, and without getting into the origins or the government issues or the dictates and things that came down from it, there is this whole conversation about spike protein, and whether it is the spike protein in regards to the virus, or is it the spike protein from the intervention that was put forward? What the heck is the spike protein that everybody's talking about? And what would you say the differentiation is between the disease that was pervasive in the world, as well as the treatment that was advocated by our medical institutions? And how does this spike protein impact us?
Great question. Ton to unpack. That's a fun one. And I'll keep this as Apple and everything PG as possible so they don't ban you. So let me approach this from a different angle actually for you. And this may be, I don't think this will be new to you, but maybe a lot of the viewers out there will pick up something new on this. So let's take the virus and actually pick apart what that is. And there's two different aspects of this. So one is called an exosome. And I'm sure you heard of an exosome before. So exosome is, I'm going to use simple stuff to break this down just because it's much easier even for me. Let's call it cellular exhaust, okay? An exosome is a virus. Now, they've used the word virus because virus would be considered contagious. Now, I'm in the chiropractic world and natural health world, and our philosophy is based on if the germ theory was correct, everybody would be dead. And you're like, what does that mean? Well, why were we using Purell for 2 years then? Okay, well, let's say this. Let's say you have a room of 100 people. And 5 people in there come in and they have some sniffly noses and they, maybe a flu or something like that. They go in and they're shaking hands and doing everything and all that good stuff. And then after an hour, everybody goes home. And when you go home, the 5 people still, they move on. Out of the 100 people that were perfectly fine, you have, say, 5 or 10 of them become unwell. But the other ones keep moving through life. Now, there's a whole spiritual aspect to that. There's a whole personal development aspect to that, their conscience and mindset, et cetera. But let's just talk about the actual physics of it. So why did not all of them get sick? Because under the germ theory, everyone would have caught it because they all shook hands. They were all in close proximity. They all picked up vapor particles from breathing and talking, et cetera. Well, the germ theory would say that they all would come down with it versus the terrain theory. The terrain theory is it's internal. Now I am
that's the whole Pasteur Beauchamp.
That's right. That's right.
Thing. So for those who don't understand that, Louis Pasteur, which is often credited with the pharmaceutical model, talked about the germ theory, which was propagated by the pharmaceutical industry and the development of drugs to kill the bad guys, the pathogens.
Yep.
Where Beauchamp, which was also in his lab, which a lot of his research was suppressed, said, no, it's not the germs that's the issue. It's how well you manage the terrain or how well you manage the defense. Now, there's some suggestions that Pasteur conceded to Beauchamp on his deathbed. We don't know if that's true or not, but a lot of people in the natural health world are applying the terrain theory, where people in the allopathic model are applying the germ theory. And so these are two competing ideas of how you address sickness and illness for those who are listening. I think that's
that was a perfect explanation, actually. Thank you for bringing that up. Now I sit pretty firmly over the terrain theory. Okay. Now with that, I will say, here's the germ theory contagion aspect to it. An exosome is considered cellular exhaust. So let's say your engine has an impurity in the gas that you put into it, right? Mm-hmm. Now, some engines will just shut down, right? If you put the wrong gas in it, some will just shut down. If you put water in an engine, it's toast. Obviously, everyone knows that. But let's just say you have a gas that's like kind of impure. You put it in there, you're driving down the road. It's still driving, but like you can feel like the idle's a little off. It's not feeling so well. The exhaust may smell a little differently, or there's something coming out of the exhaust. Well, your engine actually is smart enough, it will actually try to kick it out through the exhaust. It'll try to get rid of it out of the system. It doesn't always work. Sometimes the engine will literally shut down, or you might have a long-term problem. The engine has to be fixed. Well, consider your cell. So you have mitochondria in your cell. Your mitochondria are the engines of your body. They are your energy. They're pushing out your energy. You moving is your mitochondria working. Now, if there's a toxicity, let's talk a parasite, a heavy metal, a heavy chemical situation, you get a Lyme condition in the cell, that cell is now sick. That mitochondria becomes overwhelmed. Now what's happening is it's not living healthy. Now it's trying to push this stuff out, right? So now you have little vesicles that pop off the cell. Right now, that is what they would call a virus. Okay, that comes off. Your body will try to actually shed that off the body. Right now, if you have somebody else around, you get in close proximity. Now that could enter into their system, and they might have a problem if they've never been exposed to that, or it's a different issue. So I'm not saying that's 100% perfect. I'm just saying that that is one aspect of looking at this quote unquote spike. So what they did was, without going into all the details of it, right? There was something introduced to our lives that our bodies did not understand, it had not seen. It was actually a toxicity. And I will back this up with a friend of ours, Dr. Ryan Cole, who's a medical pathologist who actually did the studies, who actually opened up the blood vessels, opened up the bodies, looking at everything. He actually said with science that this is no longer an internal body situation. This has come out of the body so much from an exosome standpoint that it is now considered an environmental toxin. Wow. Right? So now this is being pushed off. This is why you have other things popping up like RSV and everything else, because it's pushing off. Now that is from the law of terrain theory. The other piece I want to add in there from the spike protein standpoint is, let's go to the Merck manual, because, I always like to use their science against them. So right. If you can go home and Google this, and I always like to throw this disclaimer out to any of the viewers too. Anything that I'm saying right now, I don't want anybody out there to believe a word I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I want you to actually go and look stuff up and even use their own stuff. Use Google. Like, I'm not even telling you to go to a side search engine. Use their own stuff, because everything I look up and I then send out to people, it's from their own information. I mean, I can have theories all day long, but I want objective evidence to show it. So if you go in and you type in parasites, viruses, and Merck manual, the Merck manual will literally pop up, and there's one line that says viruses are parasites.
Wow.
In the Merck manual. Now take that and push that into this whole model, and now I'm not going to say what it is. People are going to have to draw conclusions, because I want to protect Wade. When everything first happened a couple of years ago, right? And the media and all the powers that be started shouting down some medications, saying, no, those are dangerous, those don't work. Isn't it interesting that the actual medications that cost pennies, the ones that were helping people, were anti-malarial, anti-parasitic medications? Interesting, because then you go back to the Merck manual. And by the way, many of those medications were made by Merck. So the Merck manual says viruses are parasites. And then yet we took anti-malaria. Guess what? Africa didn't have a problem with this.
No.
Africa.
Bangladesh is another place that had successful
Africa, Korea. Yeah, Africa, Korea. These people take preventative anti-malarial medications, and they did not have the same result and conclusion that America had. So that's kind of my around the whole spike protein situation. Is one, I think we're dealing with something that was definitely altered and developed. But number two, we just straight up have a bioweapon now. I mean, there's no way around that. People can disagree with that or I can tell you, because you're going to start seeing the stats continue to rise. Cancer in the last year, since this whole thing was released to the public, this experiment, cancer is more than 8-fold what it's been previously. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah. And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast, it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
And also, I was looking at the all-causes mortality rates that are out by the CDC. We had something like an 800% spike in people in the ages from 20 to mid-40s.
Correct.
Now, we're not saying that is a result of maybe the disease that's spread around the world, but It could also be part of the social aspect. I look at data recently in the last few years. They went from Canada went from 4,000 suicides per year to now in excess of 10,000 suicides per year. So suicide is usually a case where people have lost all possibility of hope, and the idea of living is more painful than the idea of non-existence, or that's usually the predisposition why people choose that option. So we're looking at, obviously, with a double spike, an 800% increase in all causes mortality, the interventions that we have taken, and which have both financial and sociological aspects, which you identified as health issues, plus maybe conditions correlated with either the virus itself or its treatments, have led to a case where we've obviously altered the trajectory of health and vitality in our country, and we don't know what the long-term consequences is. So what is happening with this increase of things like cancer? And we now know that, myocarditis is a big issue, especially among young, and you had all these athletes dying suddenly. The soccer players in Europe was a big issue thing, and yet it's being pushed aside. How does that compromise you as a doctor to be able to inform people or to help people make good decisions for themselves? And what do they do?
No, it's a great question. First of all, to try to transition what I said earlier into this is, and this is using their own words, so I'll keep it PG-ish, but it's kind of their own language. You have mRNA, DNA changing technology. So what it does is it goes in there, it alters the DNA, which then let's use it in car terms. So you have a beautiful Ferrari sitting in the garage, right? And when you put that gas pedal down, man, it will go. Well, they just put the gas pedal down on the protein. So what this does now is it has the DNA now, your DNA, which has been changed, has now pushed the gas pedal down. So this protein will continue to proliferate faster and faster and faster to the point we don't know if it has an end to it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think it is going to have an end to it. So it's going to continue to get worse. And the more you take, the more it gets. So that's going to start accumulating. That's what they're finding. So when all these people are unfortunately passing away, when they're finding out later is there's clogged systems. Let's just say that, right?
Yep.
Now, how do you deal with this? Holy cow. So as a doctor, I'll tell you, I mean, in physical practice, and my colleagues too. I mean, I'm with my colleagues this weekend, 50 of them. It's changed the entire face of healthcare, not just in natural health. I mean, hey, we're still combating. I mean, obviously we have to switch things up too, because at the same time, myself and my whole practice actually saw this too, because I have, my wife and I are both chiropractors, and then we have several associates in our office. We've all had to shift our mindset and our physicality of this because we've been affected too. We're around people that have this and are coming in with this, and you can actually feel it coming off of some of them, right? Mm-hmm. So we've actually had to shift how we work, meaning there's certain people I don't fully take care of anymore. Some people are actually from a distance. We only talk to them on the phone because I have to protect myself at the end of the day. I'm not going to put myself in harm's way. But not only me, I mean, I'm the natural healthcare part. Obviously, we see, unfortunately, it's getting better, but we see a small, we see a percentage of the population. Obviously, America is still very medical. I know Canada is, the rest of the world is. I mean, medical doctors are still saying, are now waking up and going, wait a second. It's changed all of practice, because now, not only has it changed practice, it's changed medications. Mm-hmm. Now you get to find out what people are on. Now you have blood pressure medications that might be altered, because if you have a backup in the system, blood thinners, I mean, this changes everything, because as they say, the piping, the cardiovascular system could be directly altered. That's not even counting. And what you said earlier is we don't even fully know the long-term ramifications of this. I mean, you're talking about the all-cause mortality rate. We're talking about the cancer rate. These are just snapshots of the first year out of this. I mean, we don't know. Remember,
long-term, we don't know the long-term consequences.
There's no long-term studies on this. We are the long-term studies. So we don't even know how fully this affects the entire planet going forward. So when we say it's changed, and I say it's changed for us in medical, it's changed this much a little bit, which is already a huge amount. We don't even know what 5 or 10 years down the road looks like. Which is alarming, because we're obviously going to stay on the front lines. But our world is evolving before our eyes, and we're having to constantly be adept to what those changes are, so we can change what we have to do.
Yeah, it's the great challenge of our society today, and I think one of the long-term problems that I think the interventions, and wherever people are on the fence with those interventions are, but we now are seeing. Number one, the suppression of alternating points of view. Number two, the attempted suppression of data when they tried to hide the Pfizer stuff for 75 years. And then it comes out, well, you know, they did studies, for example, on 8 mice as what was, you know, tenable as, hey, this is effective science.
Have you seen anything more ridiculous, honestly? When you say that, when you say those words out loud, have you heard or seen of anything more ridiculous in your life?
Well, when this whole thing started, I had a close friend that was I'll give you an example, that was a naturopathic doctor and well-versed in this, and had decided to go in with the treatment that was recommended with the medical system. And I said, hey, look, I'm not a doctor. Can you walk me through the science? And I'm going to interject, and I want you to take apart my opinion, because I believe the sharing of opposing ideas is how you get to a more refined level of the truth. And as we went through this model, I said, well, what are the long-term consequences? Assuming that all of the points that you made are right, and I'm wrong in my objections on these points that I feel salient, which you feel aren't. how can we possibly determine the long-term consequences of this if we've done no longitudinal studies? And it was, well, because it comes from these authoritative institutions. And I'm like, well, yes, but the reason the institution has the authority because it does the research, determines the research, and then presents the research. But we have no, is it? Now, I can understand how ignorant people can make short-term decisions that aren't in the best interest. And obviously with this condition and how this proliferated, I think people in governmental institutions were stepping in the place of science, and people who were, say, objecting to that within the field, those voices were squashed in order for expediency. And now we're on the backside of that, and we're seeing the consequences. What are the things that you're seeing as a doctor right now, 2 years after both the interventions and what people did or what people didn't do, and are you seeing patterns?
Yeah, no, good question. We've had a small amount. Now, keep in mind, I'm in the natural health field, so the majority of people that come to us either have a chronic issue that they've been trying to fix and they're already looking down the natural world, or people that have been coming to us for years, or people who have questioned stuff for a long time. So I'm not seeing, I will admit, I'm not seeing the front line of what medicine's seeing. So I'm not seeing some of the horror stories. I'm hearing about them, but I'm not seeing them. So what we are seeing though, is people coming in. We've had a handful of people who have passed away, majority older from our population. We have a few elderly people who we know took it. Now, when I say elderly, they were still very able. So definitely it was out of thin air. It wasn't just oh my gosh, well, they were, 90 years old. No, people 70s, 80s who are still doing really well. And then just it, didn't wake up, or one was in their garage, something like that. We see that. The next part we see is, and there's two more I'll tell you about. Next one we see is people coming in, and man, I go back to, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm a studier too. So if I sit down with a spiritual book like a Bible, I will read through it, but I also like to put my objective mind onto it and say, okay, what are they talking about here? Like, I like to pick stuff apart. And they talk about plague and leprosy. And one of the things we've seen with this when people come in is, and we had one girl, she's a nurse, and she made her allergy problems to start with, but then she started getting everything that they told her to get. And she came in, and I kid you not, her face, it was like her face was peeling off, and not to get too grotesque, but it was a shedding of her skin, essentially. I live in Florida. This was in the summer. I mean, we're talking 100 degrees outside. She comes in, sweatpants, like 2 layers, a couple layers of sweat shirts, a mask, and a hat, because she can't even allow the air to touch her skin. That's how painful it is. And it's not just the face, it's everywhere, to the point where I'm looking at this going, obviously I'm going to try to help her. But where do you start when you have somebody like that? Because I mean, this person can barely sleep because they can hardly lay down. Like, they can't allow the air to touch their skin. That's how insane this is. So we've seen a couple of those. I've heard obviously stories from other medical doctors and stuff that are horrific. And then the last one I'll touch on is what we're finding lately is, and this can be scientifically backed, is the shedding. So where somebody has gotten it, I mean, keep in mind, they're now 4 or 5 deep with this thing, right? And their body, I mean, you can feel it energetically. Like, I can get a person around me, I can feel the energy coming off of them in not a good way, to the point where they're shedding the particles onto somebody else. And we've had people get, kind of quote unquote sick from that. So there's definitely an aspect of, because now you're going to have other things pop up. I talked about RSV earlier, right? You're going to have other mutation of stuff come from this. What we're seeing right now definitely is people are shedding this stuff off, meaning it's affecting. And that goes back also, because I always like to say, okay, how does that work scientifically? Obviously, there's papers on shedding. I have a couple at home that I was looking through. But then this also connects and links to what Dr. Cole said, which is, this is no longer in the body. This is an environmental toxin. right? So
Okay.
that's that shedding aspect of it. And then like about 2 weeks ago, I was actually working with a patient, adjusting them. And honestly, this is the other part. This is how it's changed practice. I don't even think about it because, you're in a room, you're just trying to help somebody, right? Well, this person was a larger person. They'd had multiples, but they're sweating, right? Now, we're in the middle of the soccer world down in Florida, golfers, et cetera. People are sweating all over the place. It's 100 degrees outside, they're sweating. We've taken care of 1 million athletes who are sweating. We've taken care of people who are sweating. Sweat doesn't bother me. I don't care. So I'm getting down, adjusting this person, and they're sweating. I don't think anything of it. After they're done, about 15 minutes later, I can start feeling this almost pins and needles in my fingers, in my arms, and into my face. And I'm like, what the hell is going, this is, I don't know what this is. So I grab one of my associates and I go, okay, very intuitive person too. I go, something's happening. I just saw somebody, this and this, remember bodily fluids, remember, right? Sweat. Mm-hmm. And she starts testing, checking stuff. She's like, you got shed on. Ah, crap. So I actually started getting really tired. Didn't feel so great. I don't want to say I was sick. I just started becoming a little lethargic, right? Like I wasn't feeling myself. I was like, you know what? Part of me kind of wants to go home, not to be sick, but just kind of like rest and relax. I'm a pretty much a go-getter type of person. We tested some products. Luckily, within about an hour to two, I was like right back to normal, but I had to like heavy dose drainage products. We have some energetic vaccination type homeopathics to reverse, the energetics of that. I had to take all that stuff just to kind of offset from being in human to human contact with sweaty skin, bodily fluid exchange. This is impacting a lot of stuff at the physiological level, but it's also affecting society. So I tell everybody, it's not about fear. I don't want to, it definitely, somebody who took the different recommendations from the government versus the people who didn't. I'm not saying the people who didn't are in trouble. I'm just saying this is an environment now. So everyone, doctors and public, need to be cognizant, need to be aware that there are steps you're going to have to take to just try to protect yourself as much as you can.
Let's talk about, living in the post-pandemic world, as I like to call it now, I guess. And what are the things that people need to be focused on in order to maintain a robust level of immunity, health, and vitality that you're suggesting? And I'd love to hear those interactions for people. So, because, we can't live our lives in fear. We can't live in, complete isolation. We saw the consequences of that. So how do we interact in a world moving forward without projecting judgment and isolation and, condemnation on, whatever people's choices are? How do we do that as healthy, vital persons?
Yeah, no, great question. So I'm going to give you all my radical information that I would give, that stuff like myself, my wife does, you probably do. And then from that, people can decide the ones they want to carry on, whether it be a financial situation or just they're not really necessarily believing in that. I'll give you the stuff we do. So water. So we changed our water. So this pollution we've been doing this before this, but this is even more. So we dove into distilled water. Hardcore. Obviously we put some minerals back in it, so we're getting good clean water, because I don't want anything in my water that shouldn't be there. So we're going into that. We sauna. So we're in a sauna. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a bit addicted to the sauna. So
I got a HOCAT ozone therapy sauna that I get into regularly, which I love, and then a full spectrum red light sauna as well.
Nice. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I get it.
We're doing that. I don't do it every day now, but I'm actually getting ready to go into 2023, probably doing it a little bit every day. I take a good amount of niacin to keep the cardiovascular system open. We're taking cardio products. So I've jumped into some of the just stuff like lifting up the nitric oxide in the bloodstream. Handling some, I have a heart product now that I'm taking that actually works on it's a pine needle extract. So we're working on that to make sure that's cleaned up. We're regularly taking parasitic protocols, our own ones that we use. So we do what we say we do. We walk the walk as well. We take that. I am a Linus Pauling junkie. So I am a high dose vitamin C individual. So when people are like, oh my gosh, how do you take 10,000 milligrams? I'm like, I just do it. Like I have no bowel problems, no issues with it. We keep it up because a bacteria can't live in your body if vitamin C is there. So we're vitamin C. your zincs, obviously. We've always been taking that kind of stuff over a period of time. Good sleep. Most people are not getting quality sleep. Diet, obviously, is key. I tend to be more of a keto carnivore mindset myself. You know, I used to be a caffeine junkie, so I'm down to 1 cup a day with bulletproof, MCT oil in it, butter, etc. Things like that. My wife sometimes will force me to get out of the house because I could be a hermit sometimes and get into my work. So we live near trails. We go for a walk with my daughter, go on a bike ride. And honestly, those are some of the physical things we do. And obviously people can pick and choose from there what they want. But I'll tell you this, the biggest component, if you do nothing else, the number one thing I truly believe everyone has to do is the worst part of this is the fear component, right? Mm-hmm. So for 2 to 3 years, we're still doing it, right? 2 to 3 years plus, fear is the major weapon that anybody has against us. Obviously, clean up your world, like get people who are negative out of your world. That sometimes is a spouse, that sometimes a family member or friend. I know it's difficult, but you have to do what you have to do. You have to keep yourself a healthy mindset, a healthy spiritual individual. But on top of that, for 3 years, if you have a television on in your house, get the television off. Like you're listening to fear all the time. And the worst virus or worst pathogen on the planet is not anything we talked about for the last 50 minutes. The worst one is fear and low frequency. So get your mind right, get your world right, and think in a positive way. Because I'll tell you, no matter what happens here, Wade, people ask me all the time, Dr. Dean, how are you so positive? Like with all this stuff going on and my family, whatever. I said, this is my key. My circle is very tight, very tight. Every single person in my circle is on the same exact page as I am, with the same purpose as I am, right? That is priority number one. And then from there, we are creative individuals. We know that no matter what happens, my wife, my family, my kid, circle of colleagues and friends around us, we're going to survive, and we're going to survive very well. There's no way around that. So I don't care what this world does, we will be fine. And if you keep that mindset and work on it every day, trust me, it's not perfect every day. Sometimes we all get down, right? That really is going to keep you away from this negative. They live off of negativity, Wade. You know that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important aspect, and is to maintain. I always say environment is stronger than will. So maintaining a healthy environment, maintaining a positive attitude, doing the practices we advocate at Bioptimizers and with the people that you work with. What's interesting is they're in 100% alignment, which is really fun. The truth is available to everyone, and in a technologically advanced world, is maintaining tight controls over what you are allowing to enter into your mind space. I think that is critical. And the people who are doing a good job of that, I think, are experiencing robust levels of health. And there's a lot of great things that are happening, I think, on the long term that are going to be very positive. Concordantly or conversely, if you're allowing that to slip in, past the wire, if you will, and pollute your mind, then again, you're going to reap the results of that. And I think that's not something. So not being naive, but being proactive and positive in both your physical practices as well as your mental filters. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. Where can people reach you? How do they find out more? I know you're on the bleeding edge of providing information and procedures that people can interact with and take on in their journey to better health.
Yeah, no, great question. So the best place is my social media. We're on Rumble and things like that now, but you can find us through bravetv.com. Go to the social channels. The website's being redone just to make it better because we're getting so much demand for it. We have a podcast. I have a podcast 5 days a week, starting at noon Eastern time. We go an hour to 2 hours, depending on what's going on. And we have a brand new live streaming app coming out. Looks like at the beginning of the year, where we're going to actually have groups and communities. Because one of the things I've noticed is the last 3 years, when you speak out and you preach, I've been banned on Facebook. I've been banned on YouTube, Twitter, etc. Some of them I've gone back into, but not where I had it before. But really, the place now is to get it through the streaming content. And so we're actually going to build groups because I don't want to be beholden to companies that quote unquote I don't control right now. And honestly, even the good social media, I don't control them, right? So I have to be careful sometimes what I say, or because I'm pretty bold when I put it out there. So we're building our own platform, but the best way people can get a hold of us on those platforms, if you go straight to bravetv.com, it's still up, it's being rebuilt, but it's still up. But all the social media things are there, and then the links to the show are there, because ultimately at the end of the day, the show is where it is. And I will tell everybody, I am very bold. So when you watch the show, I'm not just, Mr. Comfortable. I give blunt truths. Hey, sometimes I drop a swear word here or there, because honestly, it's not about being belligerent or an angry person. We live in a world that is really struggling. And if a word here or there offends somebody, see, in my world, you know what offends me? My world offends me is people who are getting sicker every day, people who are dying of diseases they shouldn't be dying of, and then children being harmed by all this stuff. So at the end of the day, my purpose is here. Sometimes we have to raise the volume to wake people up, but those are the best places to get us.
Dr. Jason, you are doing the Lord's work, as they say, and presenting this information and providing such a great service for people. I really appreciate you coming on our show and to be a brave voice out there in a world of confusion and in a world of fear. And I forget which president was, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
That's right. That's
right. So thank you for being that voice. Thank you for being on the podcast. And thank you for all our listeners. I would suggest that you go over and check out the social media components and those private apps and stuff that you can get access to Dr. Jason's work. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers on the Awesome Health Podcast. Give us your likes, your shares, your comments. We love to hear them. And of course, if you found this valuable, share it with your friends and family. You just never know how that might change someone's life. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.